In New York, there are abandoned cities that I honestly think you've passed your whole life without ever realizing it. Some sit right inside NYC, but they're locked down like restricted zones. Some once swallowed 10,000 people a day, then went silent like someone flipped a switch. Some were literally erased from the map because a bigger city needed clean drinking water to survive. And some were abandoned again and again, simply because America changed its priorities. In this video, I'm going to take you through the 10 most abandoned cities in New York in the most easy-to-picture way. Each location has its own signature, its own reason it died, and its own lesson you can take with you. The real question is, what makes a place get abandoned? And who ends up paying the price? Stay until the end, then comment. Which location gave you the strongest chill, and why? Number 10. Love Canal. When people hear abandoned, they picture empty streets and broken windows. Love Canal is unsettling in a different way because it started as the most ordinary thing in America. A working-class neighborhood with lawns, kids riding bikes, and a school close enough to walk to. The problem was never what you could see. It was what was sitting under the sidewalks. Here is the short version. An old, unfinished canal became a dumping ground. From the 1940s into the early 1950s, Hooker Chemical used the site to dispose of an estimated 21,000 tons of chemical waste. Years later, homes and a school were built right beside it. That is the nightmare math of Love Canal. Not a monster in the attic, but a mistake in the ground. After stretches of heavy rain and rising groundwater, contamination could move through soil and into places it never should have been. And suddenly, the quiet neighborhood vibe starts feeling less like peace and more like a warning label. Love Canal became national news in the late 1970s, and the response was not subtle. A public health emergency was declared, and eventually about 950 of the roughly 1,050 families in the immediate area were evacuated. Imagine that moment. You are not leaving because of a storm you can watch on the radar. You are leaving because the earth under your house has a story you were never told. Houses were bought out, sections were demolished, fences went up, and a community got hollowed out. It is a ghost town with paperwork instead of tumbleweeds. Now here's the part that actually helps you, not just the History Channel. Love Canal helped ignite the Superfund era, and it taught a brutally practical lesson. Cheap can be expensive if the land's past is dirty. So if you are buying or renting near old industrial parcels, rail corridors, or suspiciously flat, filled-in land, take 1 minute and do what most people skip. Look up whether the area appears on a federal or state cleanup site maps. Search the address plus the words hazardous site or Superfund. If you are serious about buying, ask what the property was before it was a house and whether an environmental assessment was ever done. And pay attention to the little clues: odd fill dirt, unusual drainage, a neighborhood built faster than the surrounding area. This is not paranoia. This is basic consumer protection. Love Canal was removed from the Superfund list in 2004 after extensive cleanup, but monitoring continues because groundwater is how contamination travels. So this story does not end with a happy ribbon cutting. It ends with fences, sensors, and long-term vigilance. And the next place on our list proves something else about New York. Sometimes abandonment is not buried underground. Sometimes it is built on purpose and then quietly left behind. Number 9. North Brother Island. If you fly into LaGuardia on a clear day, there is a weird little secret sitting in the East River. You can glimpse trees, crumbling brick, and the outline of buildings that look like they belong in a different century. And then the plane dips, the city comes back into focus, and that island disappears again. Not because it is far away, because New York decided you are not supposed to go there. North Brother Island is one of the strangest abandoned cities in the state because it is hiding inside the most crowded city in America. No desert, no mountains, just a locked, overgrown pocket of silence surrounded by constant traffic noise. It feels like somebody cut a hole in the timeline and forgot to stitch it back up. The island's real story starts with fear and public health. In the late 1800s, New York built Riverside Hospital out here to isolate contagious diseases like smallpox. This wasn't a vacation retreat. It was a containment strategy. The city's message was simple. What scares people most should be pushed out of sight, but kept close enough to control. And if you want a human face for that idea, it is hard to beat the case of Typhoid Mary, a cook who was forcibly quarantined on this island for years because officials believed she could spread disease without showing symptoms herself. Whether you see that as protection or punishment, it leaves a knot in your stomach. Because it forces the question nobody wants to answer. How much freedom would you trade for safety if you were the one being locked away? As medicine advanced, the island's purpose faded. It shifted roles over the decades, serving different city needs, including housing at times, before eventually becoming a place that simply had no modern job left. When the last program shut down, the building stayed. The people didn't. And unlike most abandoned places on the internet, this one is not a playground for explorers. Access is restricted partly because the structures are unstable and partly because nature moved in like it finally got its apartment back. The island became a refuge for birds, thick with vegetation, a reminder that when humans leave, the city doesn't become empty. It gets repurposed. Here's the useful part for you, because curiosity is not an excuse to trespass. If you want to experience North Brother Island, do it the right way. Bring binoculars or a zoom lens and view it from public shorelines. Shoot from a distance. Let the island stay quiet. The point of this place is not adrenaline. The point is the feeling it gives you. New York can hide an entire chapter of its history in plain sight. And next on our list, we leave the water behind and head to a different kind of abandonment. The kind built for crowds, designed to welcome everyone, and then left standing when the crowds stopped coming. Number 8, Buffalo Central Terminal. There is a specific kind of silence you only hear in places that were built for crowds. Not "nobody lives here" silence. More like the echo of 10,000 footsteps that used to hit the floor at the same time. Buffalo Central Terminal is that silence made out of brick, steel, and Art Deco confidence. This station opened in 1929, right when America still believed the future would arrive on rails. The design wasn't modest. It was a statement. A 271-foot tower rising over the tracks, a massive concourse with the kind of height that makes your voice sound smaller, and a layout built to handle the daily chaos of travel. At its peak, the terminal was promoted as serving more than 200 trains and around 10,000 passengers per day. That's not a building, that's a moving city. And then the moving city stopped moving. By 1979, passenger service had shifted away, and what was once Buffalo's front door became an enormous room with no reason to exist. You can almost feel the moment the routine broke. No more announcements, no more luggage wheels, no more reunions and goodbyes under the same ceiling. The architecture stayed loyal, people didn't. And that is why this place hits so hard. It isn't abandoned in the way a desert town is abandoned. It is abandoned, like a promise that expired. Here is the practical takeaway that makes this more than a haunted photo op. Big abandoned infrastructure tells you exactly how a city changed. When you see a station like this, ask 3 questions. First, what did this place connect and what replaced it? In Buffalo's case, America fell in love with highways and cheap flights, and rail travel lost its grip. Second, where did the jobs and foot traffic go when the hub went quiet? And third, what happens next? Because a shell this big can either rot or become a second chance. Buffalo's Central Terminal is interesting because it refuses to be a pure ruin. It was listed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1984, and a local preservation group formed in the late 1990s to keep it standing and pull people back in through tours and events. That matters because it turns the story from "look what we lost" into "watch what a city can recover if it cares enough." So if you ever find yourself in Buffalo, don't just look at the terminal like it's a corpse. Look at it like a diagnostic scan. It shows you where the pulse used to be. It shows you how transportation reshaped American life. and it asks a question most cities avoid. When the future changes its mind, do we demolish our past or do we learn how to reuse it? Next up, we leave the grandeur behind and head to a place where abandonment didn't come from a national trend, but from a very local collapse that hollowed out an entire community. Number 7. Letchworth Village. From the road, it doesn't look like a nightmare. It looks like the edge of a quiet park. Trees, open space, a few paths. The kind of place you would expect joggers, not warning signs. But keep walking and the mood changes fast, because Letchworth Village isn't an abandoned town that collapsed from poverty. It is an abandoned system. And that difference matters. Letchworth opened in 1911 as a village for people with developmental disabilities, built on an idea that sounded progressive for its time. Instead of one giant institution, it was laid out like a small community, with separate buildings spread across a huge campus. On paper, it was care with dignity. In practice, the story of places like this in America often turns into something more complicated. Overcrowding, underfunding, and the slow way good intentions can rot when nobody wants to look too closely. What makes Letchworth especially hard to shake is how normal it tried to appear. There were lawns, there were routines, there were buildings that resemble schools, dorms, offices. It was designed to run like its own little city. And then the city moved on. By the late 20th century, the country shifted toward deinstitutionalization, pushing services out into communities instead of keeping people hidden on remote campuses. Letchworth eventually closed in 1996. The people were relocated, the buildings were left behind. And the emptiness became the loudest thing on the property. Now here's the part most abandoned videos skip, and it's the part that gives you something useful. Letchworth is a reminder that neglect is not always dramatic. It can be bureaucratic, it can be quiet. It can happen while everyone insists they are doing their best. So when you hear a community debating mental health services, disability support, shelters, or long-term care, pay attention to the language. Out of sight is often sold as efficient. Temporary often becomes permanent. And the people most affected rarely get to speak for themselves. This place is what happens when a society treats care as a line item instead of a moral obligation. There's another uncomfortable lesson here too. Letchworth's history connects to public health and medical progress in ways that still spark debate. Because institutions have often been used as convenient places to run programs that would be harder to justify elsewhere. If you want to be a smarter consumer of history, don't just ask, was this legal? Ask, who had the power to refuse? And if you ever visit the area, do it with respect. Stay on public paths, follow posted rules, and do not treat it like a haunted amusement park. The real horror isn't ghosts, it's how easy it is for a whole population to be forgotten while the rest of the world keeps driving past. Next up, we leave this quiet campus behind and head into a very different kind of abandonment, where the dream wasn't care, it was entertainment, and the crowds disappearing changed everything overnight. Number 6. Seneca Army Depot. Picture this, a line of white deer moving through tall grass, almost glowing, and behind them, concrete bunkers that look like half-buried igloos. That's not a movie set, that's a real place. And the reason it feels unreal is because Seneca Army Depot is 2 stories stacked on top of each other. One story is nature, the other story is the Cold War. This facility sat between the towns of Romulus and Varick and operated for decades as a massive military storage and logistics site. We're talking about a footprint of roughly 10,000 acres. Inside the fences were miles of roads, security checkpoints, and hundreds of reinforced bunkers designed to store explosives and sensitive materials. At its peak, it functioned like a closed-off city with one job: handle the things the public was never meant to see. Then the world changed. After the Cold War, the United States started trimming and reshaping its defense footprint, and Seneca ended up on the closure track. The depot was placed on the BRAC list in the mid-1990s and officially closed in 2000. When a place like this shuts down, it doesn't just lose workers, it loses purpose. And when purpose disappears behind barbed wire, what you get is this eerie, overbuilt landscape that suddenly has nothing to protect. Here's the part that hooks people. There's a long-running public fascination with what was stored here, including claims and historical reports suggesting the depot was connected to nuclear weapons storage at certain points. You don't need to turn that into a conspiracy to feel the weight of it. The real takeaway is simpler and more unsettling. An entire region can be economically shaped by a mission it never fully understands, and then left to adapt when that mission ends. And now for something actually useful, because abandoned military sites aren't just interesting, they're practical lessons in land and risk. Seneca is also a Superfund site, which means cleanup and monitoring have been part of the story. If you ever live near a former base, depot, or industrial military property, don't rely on rumors or vibes. Look up the site on EPA or state environmental pages. See what areas were remediated, what areas are still monitored, and what the redevelopment plan actually allows. Closed does not always mean finished. If you want to experience Seneca without trespassing, there's a smarter way to do it. Parts of the former depot have been repurposed, including wildlife-focused attractions tied to those famous white deer. That's the strange beauty of this place. The same fences that once protected military secrets also isolated a rare-looking population of deer, turning a symbol of war-era security into a modern roadside wonder. Seneca Army Depot proves something about abandonment in New York. Sometimes the ruins aren't old enough to feel historical. Sometimes they're just modern enough to feel like the country walked away mid-sentence. Next up, we shift from bunkers and barbed wire to a different kind of American collapse, where the dream wasn't national defense, it was pure entertainment. Number 5, Grossinger's Resort. Close your eyes and imagine the sound this place used to make. Not wind through broken windows, I mean real noise. A dining room packed with people, chairs scraping, a band warming up, kids running in the hallway, and a loudspeaker announcing the next activity, like the resort itself was a small country with its own schedule. Grossinger's wasn't a hotel, it was a summer universe. It started small in 1917, the classic Catskills story. Then it grew into something almost absurdly complete. Dozens of buildings spread across the property, pools, nightclubs, sports, and a level of everything is taken care of that made city families feel like they could finally breathe. At its peak, it had amenities that sound like exaggeration until you realize this was the business model. A 27-hole golf course, huge entertainment spaces, and dining capacity measured in the thousands. It wasn't selling rooms, it was selling routine. You arrived and the place told you how to have fun. And if this all feels familiar, it should. The Catskills resort world helped shape American leisure culture, and Grossinger's is often linked to the vibe that later showed up in stories like Dirty Dancing. That isn't just trivia. It's proof that this place wasn't a random building in the woods. It was a cultural engine. So why did it die? Grossinger's closed in 1986, and the reason is painfully modern. America's idea of a vacation changed. When flying became cheaper and easier, the competitive edge of drive a few hours from New York City and disappear into the mountains got weaker. People who once picked the Catskills started picking Florida, the Caribbean, the West Coast, anywhere they could reach faster and farther. When a resort's magic depends on being the best escape within driving distance, the airplane is basically a wrecking ball. Here's the value you can pull from this story, because it's bigger than one abandoned resort. If you want to understand whether a tourism town will thrive or collapse, watch two simple indicators. First, travel friction. Are people willing to drive, or do they expect a direct flight in a rental car? Second, the group vacation factor. Places like Grossinger's were built for big, shared experiences. When culture shifts towards smaller, customized trips, giant all-inclusive properties that rely on crowds can lose their core advantage overnight. And the eerie part is that even ruins don't always last. Years of decay, demolition, and fires have erased big chunks of what once stood here, and the land keeps changing hands as developers talk about revivals. That's the final lesson. The abandonment isn't always permanent. Sometimes the building dies, but the location gets rebooted for a new era. Grossinger's is what happens when an entire lifestyle goes out of fashion. Next on our list, the dream won't be summer fun. It'll be something harder, heavier, and tied to the machinery that once kept whole working-class towns alive. Number 4. Bethlehem Steel Lackawanna Works. Stand on the Lake Erie shoreline here and you can feel the scale before you even understand it. This wasn't a factory. This was a city that happened to make steel. At its peak, more than 20,000 people worked inside this complex. Think about that for a second. That's an entire small city waking up on the same schedule, cashing paychecks from the same place, building their lives around the same smokestacks. Then the smokestacks went quiet. By the early 1980s, the layoffs and shutdowns hit, and the identity of the whole area cracked. When a single employer becomes your economy, your school funding, your diners, your Little League sponsors, your mortgage payments, losing that employer doesn't feel like change. It feels like the ground dropping out. That's why the ruins here don't read as cool abandoned buildings. They read as the outline of a life that used to be predictable. But Lackawanna's story doesn't stop at rust. It gets more complicated and honestly more useful. Because when heavy industry leaves, it doesn't only leave empty buildings. It leaves a bill, soil, groundwater, sediment, long-term cleanup that can outlast the jobs by decades. Parts of this site were contaminated from industrial processes like coke making, and the cleanup has involved real engineering, not just a fence and a warning sign. If you're watching this and thinking, okay, but what does that have to do with me? Here's the point. Every state has places like this, and they're often closer to neighborhoods than people realize. So here's a simple value check you can steal from this entry. When you see a huge, empty industrial property in any city, don't only ask, why did it close? Ask, what was it doing to the land while it was open and what is the plan now? You can usually find answers through state environmental agencies or the EPA. If you're buying a home near an old plant, a rail yard, or a creek that runs past industrial land, it's worth 5 minutes of research. It's not paranoia, it's basic neighborhood literacy. Now, the strangest part of Lackawanna is what happens after the fall. Some of this lakefront has been repurposed in a way that feels almost symbolic. Wind turbines rose on reclaimed sections of the site, and new solar development has been planned nearby. In other words, the same shoreline that once powered the 20th century with steel is being asked to power the next century with energy. That contrast is hard to ignore. It's like watching history switch uniforms. Lackawanna Works is abandonment with consequences and reinvention with receipts. It proves that the end of an industrial era isn't just a visual aesthetic, it's an environmental and economic aftershock that communities either manage or inherit. Next on our list, we take a sharp turn from steel and shorelines to a kind of abandonment you can't even see from the street because the city isn't on land anymore. Number 3, Pepacton Reservoir drowned hamlets. If you're waiting for crumbling walls and graffiti, you won't get it here. This abandoned city has no ruins to walk through because the streets aren't empty. They're underwater. Somewhere beneath that calm surface, there used to be a valley with porches, barns, bridges, mail routes, and the kind of small-town familiarity that never makes the news until it's gone. Pepacton Reservoir is part of New York City's water system, and it's one of the biggest pieces of that puzzle. In normal conditions, it can supply a huge share of the city's daily water, which means millions of people drink from a place most of them will never visit, and almost none of them will think about. That's what makes this entry hit different. It's not abandonment from failure, it's abandonment by design. In the 1940s and early 1950s, the valley was cleared so the reservoir could be built. Nearly 1,000 residents were displaced and entire hamlets were erased. Imagine being told your town isn't closing, your town is being unmade, homes are purchased, roads are cut, and landmarks that once oriented your life stop mattering because the map itself is changing. Even cemeteries were moved because when a reservoir rises, it doesn't negotiate with memory. Here's the uncomfortable American truth hiding in this story. Modern comfort always has a footprint, and sometimes that footprint is another community. When a city the size of New York needs clean water, it doesn't just build pipes, it rearranges geography. The trade is simple on paper: water for millions, loss for a few. But when you say it out loud, it stops sounding simple. Now let's turn that into something useful for you, because this isn't only history. It's a way to read the world. The next time you see a major reservoir on a map, ask 3 questions. First, what was here before the water? Second, who was relocated and where did they go? Third, who benefits today? Those questions will teach you more about infrastructure than any textbook, because infrastructure isn't just engineering. It's policy, power, and priorities, and if you want to experience Pepacton without romanticizing it or breaking rules, treat it like what it is: a working water supply. Access is controlled, and activities like boating or fishing can require permits and specific precautions. That isn't the city being mean, that's the city protecting the water you drink. The best way to visit is to respect the boundaries, bring a map, and let the silence do its job. Because once you understand what's beneath the surface, the reservoir stops being scenic. It becomes a submerged archive. Next up, we go from a valley that vanished on purpose to a place that disappeared in a different way. Not underwater, but behind gates, signs, and a decision that people weren't allowed to argue with. Number 2, Doodletown. Here's a sentence that shouldn't make sense, but it does. There are funerals in this ghost town. Not every day, not even every year, but often enough that the place refuses to become a simple ruined story. Doodletown has no residents, no power lines, no mail, and no main street. Yet the cemeteries still matter, because descendants of the families who lived here kept burial rights. So this isn't just an abandoned place. It's an abandoned neighborhood that still gets visitors for the most personal reason possible. Doodletown sits inside Bear Mountain State Park, close enough to New York City that it feels unreal when you first learn it exists. People come to this area for weekend hikes and scenic overlooks. Most of them have no idea they're walking through what used to be a small community tucked into the hills. And what makes it especially American is how it ended. This town didn't collapse because the mines dried up or the factory moved away. It was removed from the map by policy. In the 1960s, the Park Commission bought up properties, and the remaining holdouts were pushed out through eminent domain. By 1965, the town was effectively gone. The buildings were demolished. The land was folded into a public park system. So what's left? Not the kind of abandoned house footage people expect. What you see are foundations, stone walls, stairs leading to nowhere, old road beds that feel like they're trying to remember where they used to go. It's the outline of ordinary life, frozen at ground level. And because Doodletown is mostly trace evidence, it forces you to use your imagination, which is why it sticks in your brain longer than a flashy ruin. There's also a weird historical footnote that adds texture without turning this into fantasy. Thomas Edison once took interest in iron mining in this area. Even he had big ideas about extracting value from the land here, and even those plans didn't last. That detail matters because it shows how long people have been trying to make this place into something, and how often the place slips away from the plan. Now here's the value you can take with you if you ever visit. Treat Doodletown like a living memorial, not a horror attraction. Stay on the trail, respect closures, don't climb into unstable structures or treat graveyards like scenery. Bring water, wear proper shoes, and check park alerts before you go, because storms have damaged trails in recent years and access can change. The right mindset is simple. You're not hunting an abandoned town. You're walking through a decision New York made about land, public benefit, and whose home becomes everyone else's wilderness. And that's the real reason Doodletown belongs near the top of this list. It proves abandonment isn't always accidental. Sometimes it's planned, enforced, and then quietly forgotten, until you realize someone is still coming back to say goodbye. Or a number 1, Tahawus. Most people think New York is neon, subways, and skyscrapers. Tahawus is the New York you reach only when the road stops and the forest starts acting like a wall. And then, without warning, you find something that looks impossible in the middle of the trees. A massive stone blast furnace, like a ruined monument that belongs in another continent. Locals call it the McIntyre Blast Furnace, and it sits there like proof that the wilderness once lost a fight. Tahawus was never a normal town. It was a purpose-built place, the kind of community that exists for one reason and one reason only: extract something valuable, then leave. In the 1800s, iron drew people in. The furnace was expensive, ambitious, and short-lived. Flooding and inefficiency turned the dream into a lesson, and the project collapsed. But the land kept whispering resources, so the story didn't end. It rebooted. By the early 1940s, Tahawus mattered again because the world was at war, and titanium-rich ore suddenly wasn't just a business opportunity, it was strategic. The site was developed and expanded for mining tied to that demand. And once you understand that, the ghost town becomes easier to read. Those foundations and scattered structures aren't random decay. They are the leftover shapes of a national priority that changed direction when history changed direction. Here's a detail that makes Tahawus feel like a crossroads instead of just a ruin. Nearby is McNaughton Cottage, and tied to Theodore Roosevelt's famous Adirondack moment in 1901 when he received word about President McKinley and began the journey that would make him president. That's the strange power of this area. It holds industrial ambition and political history in the same patch of forest, like the Adirondacks were quietly watching America invent itself. Now for the value you can actually use, because Tahawus is a masterclass in how one-reason towns rise and fall. If you want a quick framework for any boomtown story, use 3 questions. First, what single resource or institution created the town? Second, what changed that made the town unnecessary? Technology, markets, regulation, or geopolitics? Third, what happens after the exit? Does the place rot, get repurposed, or become protected land? Tahawus gives you all 3 answers in one location, and that's why it earns the top spot. Today, parts of the former Tahawus tract have been preserved and folded into public access and trailhead use, turning a site built for extraction into a gateway for people who come for the mountains instead of the ore. That reversal is the real story. Industry carved a footprint into the Adirondacks. Then the Adirondacks slowly reclaimed it. And now visitors walk through the evidence on their way to places like the high peaks. Tahawus isn't scary because it's empty. It's powerful because it shows how quickly a town can vanish when its purpose disappears, and how the land always gets the final vote. And that's the part people don't expect about abandoned cities in New York. They're not just creepy backdrops, they're receipts. A neighborhood can vanish because the ground turns toxic. A hospital island can be locked away because a city decides control matters more than access. A steel plant can die and leave behind decades of cleanup. A valley can be erased underwater so millions can turn on a tap. And a mining town can reboot, collapse, and reboot again until the forest wins. My personal takeaway is simple: abandonment isn't random. It's policy, economics, and human priorities made visible. Now I want to hear from you. Which location hit you the hardest and why? And if you could save one place on this list, would you preserve it as a warning, or rebuild it as something new?